I'm Brandi Kruse. You're watching Undivided. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. We've got a very special episode today as we take a look at one of the most important swing seats in the entire country when it comes to the ability of Republicans to take back the U.S. House. It is Washington's 8th Congressional District. Here's a little primer on the race. Hands down, it's one of the most critical swing seats in the entire country, Washington's 8th Congressional District, a half-rural, half-suburban seat currently held by two-term Democratic Congresswoman Kim Schroer.
I just want the district, the voters in this district, to know how hard I work every day for them.
But given President Biden's underwater approval ratings and the state of the economy, Republicans believe the historically red seat can be taken back. Reagan Dunn and Jensen are considered Republican frontrunners, but one of them has to make it past the primary election. We spoke, of course, about topics they believe will sway voters in their direction, like inflation.
The things that people care about in the 8th Congressional District are the economy, pocketbook issues.
And, of course, the nation's crime crisis.
People are concerned about getting their kids safely to school. They're concerned about crime. And we had 3 armed robberies in 72 hours.
But, no surprise, they were less excited to discuss abortion, what's turning out to be a key issue in a district that sits just east of Seattle, one of America's most progressive cities. For the record, where do you stand on abortion?
I have a libertarian position, and neither the right nor the left likes my position at all.
I don't feel like you gave me an answer. And I asked like 6 times. So is there a reason why you're tap dancing around that?
I'm not tap dancing around it, Brandi.
Okay,
I'm personally
that's my
pro-life.
characterization.
I'm the son of a pastor and personally pro-life.
While the current fight over abortion could benefit the incumbent, President Biden's low approval ratings present a unique challenge for her, so much so that she ran this ad.
What you care about here at home is what I fight for in Congress. Gas prices. I'm taking on the Biden administration to suspend the gas tax.
I gotta say, I was like, what is she talking about? What are you taking on the Biden administration about? Like, because he supports a gas tax holiday. So with competing forces at play, Washington's 8th Congressional District is sure to be a swing seat showdown, and the winner could put Republicans back in control. While there are about a dozen people in the race for the 8th Congressional District, there are really 3 who are considered to be frontrunners. Obviously, the Democratic incumbent, Congresswoman Kim Schroer, and as I mentioned, there are 2 Republicans, Republican Jensen and Republican Reagan Dunn. I got a chance to sit down with all 3 of them this week, one of them virtually, to talk about the race and to talk about not only some of the issues at play in the 8th Congressional District in Washington, but these are some of the same issues, the same narratives that are going to be at play across the country leading up to the November midterm election. Of course, in Washington, our primary election is August 2nd. So it really means that voters in the 8th are going to pick the Republican that advances. I mean, obviously, Kim Schroer is going to advance, but they have a decision to make between, a slew of Republicans. But as I said, 2 of the frontrunners, Jensen and Reagan Dunn. I'm going to play those interviews for you on today's episode in the order we taped them. I will note, I'm going to provide, for those watching on video, some editorial notes along the way. As you know, there are often half-truths in political campaigns, perhaps missing context. So in areas where I believe there is more information that needs to be given to you, I will provide that on the screen. If you're listening to this on podcast, just know that I will give candidates an opportunity to rebut some of the claims made against them as the interviews move forward. We're going to start with Reagan Dunn. Again, first interview that I taped. Reagan Dunn is a 5-term King County Council member. He says that he's running to stop the, quote, failed policies of Seattle from spreading to the suburbs. He is a former federal prosecutor. He describes himself as a proud fiscal conservative. Here's our conversation. You were just telling me it's a busy day today. Coming down to the wire.
Busy day coming down to the wire. T-minus 2 weeks for a congressional primary with 11 candidates in it.
11 candidates, not 11 that have a chance. Am I looking at the next congressman from the 8th Congressional District?
Well, I'm going to let the voters decide that, but I tell you what, I certainly have the experience, and I think our message is something that has a very good chance at carrying the day. So I'm cautiously optimistic that I can get through the primary and be the best chance to discuss and debate the issues with Kim Schroer, who currently holds the seat in Congress.
Is there any part of you that feels entitled to this seat because your mother had it?
Not at all. One thing you learn when you run for public office, it's one of the most humbling processes you can go through. You really learn that you have to earn every single vote. You have to earn the public's trust. I've been able to do it in the largest single district inside the 8th Congressional District, my seat in Congress, which is more than 250,000 people.
Your seat at the council.
Yeah, at the King County Council. I've been elected 5 times with an average of 65% of the vote in a district that Biden carried with 61% himself. So it is very much a swing district, and I've learned to communicate, talk about issues that really affect people's everyday lives, and I believe that will translate into a lot of support for a seat in Congress with the background and experience that I've achieved over many years serving the public and also in the private sector.
Who are the people of the 8th Congressional District?
Well,
besides me.
That's
Yeah.
right. You live there. I live there. I actually have a home in southeast King County in the 8th, in our little vacation spot that we bought 15 years ago in Kittitas County, which is also in the 8th. It's an independent group of voters. It's 800,000 people that span 6 counties, 3 counties on the west side of the state, 3 counties on the eastern portion of the Cascade Mountains. And I'll tell you what, it's a light pink district. It's about plus 2 points more Republican than Democrat. Multiple polls have shown that. So that's why historically it's been carried by Republicans, but in 2018, one of the worst years for Republicans in modern history, it became an open seat, and Democrats were able to take it. So Kim Schroer has it now, but there'll be good, robust fight moving forward to take it back. It is the only Tier 1 race on the west coast of the United States for control of Congress. But I think what defines folks in the 8th is they're independent-minded, fiscally conservative, but they're also pro-environment. They care about their open spaces. They care a lot about good government. And they know that they need somebody who's going to be an advocate for them in Washington, D.C., because Washington, D.C. isn't thinking about people in Washington State unless their elected leaders are forcing them to think about Washington State.
We'll talk about issues related to polling, but first, while you've been out and about talking to folks, what issues are top of their list?
Well, in the 8th Congressional District, it's different than what you see statewide. When Seattle dominates polling numbers statewide, the 8th is far different. The things that the people care about in the 8th Congressional District are the economy, pocketbook issues, inflation, the price of gasoline, the price of consumer goods and services. That dominates the discussion, along with a second subject, which is crime. People know that last year were the record homicides in Washington State, record shootings in King County, which is 55% of the 8th Congressional District by population. Homicides and shootings are up again so far this year in 2022. So they're really worried about the economy and inflation, and they're really worried about crime. And then border security is another issue that folks are focusing on, as well as now a little bit reproductive rights is an issue that's come up. Environment is always important as well.
On the issue of reproductive rights, did you see what's been trickling out of the Seattle Times King 5 poll in that regard?
Yeah, I saw that, and that polls heavily throughout Western Washington. But it is certainly an issue. But I also don't think it's an issue that will be the top issue come November. It's an issue that's hot, front and center right now because of the Supreme Court decision. What affects 100% of the voters is the price of gas, or the cost of goods at the grocery store, or building materials, or things that they pay for every day. And so ultimately, I think that issue wanes some, although very important to a certain group of people. It's not as important as things like pocketbook issues or crime. The other thing that's interesting about reproductive rights as an issue is most of the people on those spectrums already know who they're going to vote for, whereas the pocketbook issues, inflation, economy, and crime, those are much more open to people shifting sides depending on which politician and elected official supports their views the most on that subject.
In this WA poll, and I'm not one for polls, I'm always skeptical of polls, but the Seattle Times is claiming that among suburban voters, which reflects a huge chunk, obviously, of the 8th Congressional District is in the suburbs, that abortion is the #1 issue and inflation is #2. Do you believe that?
No, I don't. My polling, I just got a poll back the other day. That's not what we're seeing. Of course, that's across the 8th Congressional District, which includes 3 counties in eastern Washington. It is important. 36% believe the economy, inflation is the #1 issue. 36% believe crime is the number one issue. You drop down to 18% when you're talking about abortion. But, you know, if you look at Tacoma, Everett, Seattle, and add those in, that is the number perhaps that they see. But, you know, one thing I've learned in this life is that polls are polls. It depends a whole lot on the sample size and the pollster. But I think it would be naive and foolhardy to say that that's not an important issue for voters. It must be taken seriously and it must be talked about.
For the record, where do you stand on abortion?
I have a libertarian position, and neither the right nor the left likes my position at all. I don't believe government should be involved in that decision-making process. I don't believe that's something that government should have a say in, and I don't want a East Coast-centric Supreme Court telling us what to do. When they do that, you get the kind of craziness that's happened over the last several weeks and months. I don't believe that senators from Alabama, Texas, or Georgia should be telling us what we can do here in Washington State. And so I think it's good to have local control on that issue. And if government is going to get involved, I'd rather have it be local government like your state government than folks nationally making the decision. And so they're like, okay, well, Reagan, then how are you going to vote in Congress? And the answer is simply, I don't believe the federal government should be involved. So I'm not going to support a ban on abortions if I'm elected to Congress.
So if you're a congressman, if there's any attempt from your party to restrict abortions any further on a national level, you would not be in support of that?
I would vote no, because it's not the federal government's role to do that. It's not in the Constitution of the United States to say that the federal government has jurisdiction over something like abortions. For the same reason, I'm not going to support or codify a law making it legal. The state should decide. I don't support any federal funding of abortion. So let the local control happen. Washington State has the position right now that abortion is legal. I think that's a good position for us and for women in Washington State. And I would continue, if the vote came down to me, if a ballot was sent to my mailbox and said, would you support a woman's right to make a decision to have an abortion? I would vote yes. But I don't think the federal government should be the one making the decision.
One thing to vote in the safety of your home, it's another thing with the pressure of the party at the national level. If it came down to you, can you stand up to that pressure?
No, I've been standing up to that pressure for more than a decade on the King County Council. I get all the nonprofit sector and all the party activists and all the business community and journalists pressuring me, and I vote 8-1 all the time, trying to hold the line on spending, hold the line. I was 8-1 on the issue recently where they wanted to take King County tax dollars to fund abortion services for individuals out of state. I don't think the taxpayer should be on the hook for abortion. So I'm constantly put under pressure. I have a rock solid voting record in terms of resisting the public whims and trends of the day, opposing things like defunding the police, all of that. People know where I stand. They know I have the courage to vote against the political pressure of my own party or the media or the community at large and do what I think is right.
Well, you just told me when you sat down, Kim Schroer dropped a flyer on you today. I haven't seen it yet. That is about abortion. What is she attacking you on then if you're pro-choice?
She is, well, I didn't say I'm, pro-choice either.
You said you're in favor of a woman's right to...
I think the woman should be able to make the right decision. See, as soon as you get to pro this, pro that, pro-life, pro-choice, you're engaging in the tribalism of the issue. That is, you're either in this camp or you're in this camp. It's either a toggle switch. You're either with us or against us. Mm-hmm. There are other places you can be. It's called the middle. Yeah. You can actually have a position that rejects all tribalism and tries to take a reasonable, common sense approach to it. So she's attacking me for a recent vote that she and her campaign decided to set up at the King County Council, which was, and here's what it said, Supreme Court wants to end your access to contraception. So Supreme Court wants to end access to same-sex marriage. And Supreme Court wants to end Roe v. Wade. How do you vote? Do you vote yes? Well, I don't believe the Supreme Court wants to end same-sex marriage. Look at Justice Kavanaugh's ruling, or end access to contraception. It was a hyper-partisan vote designed to placate a Democrat Party base, excite the base. I'm not going to take the bait on that stuff.
Performative. It was performative.
It was performative, and it was designed to do exactly what happened, which is give Kim Schroer a point to attack me on, because she is most worried about me in a general election, which is why I'm the only Republican candidate she's attacking.
I'll ask her about all of that later on today.
Yeah.
We'll talk about Kim Schroer in a moment. Jesse Jensen, who I think most people assume is your biggest competition. Do you feel bad at all? The man ran this once before, got no support from the National Republican Party, jumps back in it again, and then here comes Reagan Dunn strolling in saying, I'm going to give this a shot.
Well, Jesse Jensen couldn't win. He lost by nearly 4%.
That's not that bad, though.
Yeah, but do you think this year is going to be 4% better? All of the polling that I've seen, Jesse Jensen continues to lose to Kim Schroer. He lost in the primary last time. He lost in the general last time. He's losing to her head-to-head now. I am not. I'm beating Kim Schroer right now by 4%.
In which poll?
In a More Information poll that just came out the other day. So that's because I have the experience. I've been elected to more than 250,000 people time and again in King County. I've shown where I stand on the issues. I've been a federal prosecutor, anti-terrorism work. I've been appointed by the President of the United States to run the national effort to fight gun-related violent crime. I've testified before Congress many, many times on issues important to the Pacific Northwest. I've been appointed, elected. I've done a lot of work. I've been Washington State's outstanding local elected official of the year. That's the kind of resume you need to challenge Kim Schroer, and that's why I'm leading her in the polls. And so Jesse Jensen is a good candidate. He's running a good, solid primary campaign, and I think people have the choice. But like you said, are you entitled to the office? Jesse Jensen is not entitled to the office. Neither am I. The voters are the ones who will decide who proceeds through the primary to face Kim Schroer.
Do you see any substantive policy differences between you and Jesse Jensen?
Well, yeah, there are some. I think abortion is one. That's probably the biggest one. My concern with Jesse is his ads continue to be not truthful. His ads suggest that I cut $100 million from the police department at the sheriff's office. That's not true. When I came on the council, the budget for the sheriff's office was $115 million. Today, it's $205 million. I've increased funding by $90 million. And that's why the two largest police organizations, or two of the three, WACOPs, Washington Council of Police and Sheriffs, as well as King County Police Officers Guild, have endorsed me. Congressman Dave Reichert, former sheriff, has endorsed me, as well as a lot of other law enforcement leaders like Clay Myers, the sheriff in Kittitas County. People have had enough of the attack ads. They really don't like the things that aren't accurate. They want to see people be straightforward in terms of how they are, how they vote. I have a long record of voting. It's a rock solid voting record. You don't know where Jesse Jensen or Matt Larkin are going to be on their votes. They can say whatever they want because they don't have a record. I do have a record, and it's a record I'm proud of.
Well, let's talk about electability and attack ads. Have you seen the mailer that came out about your past issues with drinking?
Yeah, I have.
When I saw it, I live in the 8th.
Right.
I thought it was a Kim Schroer mailer.
Right.
It is not. It was funded by a pro-Jesse Jensen PAC, as you know. Yeah. We'll get to the subject matter of it, but what did you think about that mailer?
Well, I brought it. I have it here.
You do?
I have it with me. And as you well know, I've been in recovery for many years. 5 years of sobriety. I'm one of the leading voices in the community on substance use disorders and helping people overcome addiction. We know that 1 in 6 Americans suffers from some form of addiction, 1 in 8 from alcoholism, and I have been very vocal leading on issues, making Washington State the first in the kind. And this is the attack. Well, most of this isn't true, but when you stigmatize, here's Reagan Dunn with pictures of bottles and glasses and all kinds of stuff, you have a chilling effect on people who are trying to seek recovery. I will tell you this, it's a huge problem throughout our community. 64% of our homeless people are actively addicted to drugs and alcohol. It affects most families in America. It isn't fair or helpful to take a personal smear attack on somebody, particularly when those comments, many of them were made as I speak to groups talking about my story to help give them the inspiration to get sober. That isn't the kind of attack that is helpful, and in fact, it's backfired, as you probably heard. Dino Rossi, Dave Reichert and a lot of other Republicans signed a letter condemning Jesse Jensen for those attacks.
And to be fair, it is, I don't know the extent to which Jesse Jensen, this is from a PAC, right? I don't know if he knew about the ad, or anything like that. And I'll talk to him about it later.
Well, yeah. So Jesse Jensen is the only beneficiary of that PAC.
Correct, and there's a lot of candidates that have PACs that
Right.
operate on their behalf. So I don't want to make any assumptions. I will speak to him about the ad.
You should. You should ask him. I have a text from a lobbyist who was in the room with his campaign manager who said next week Reagan Dunn will be hit with an independent expenditure ad. Next week I was hit with an independent expenditure ad. It was Jesse Jensen's super PAC. So, I mean, he can walk away. But let's do that. Let me just do this. Let me separate this. There's two types of attacks in politics, okay? There's personal smears on people and their families that aren't appropriate for anything. Then there's another kind of attack. It's contrasting with an opponent on issues, on subject matters, on how you're likely to vote, or groups you affiliate with that have voting records or backgrounds. That's fair game. Okay, so I've taken lots of votes. I have a very fat voting record over my time on the county council. It's easy to attack me on this. That's fair game. Let's go there. Let's stay there. If you're really going to attack, I prefer the just positive ads. Sometimes you can't. Try and stay there, not on the personal smear campaigns.
And I couldn't agree more, but you knew going into this that these past issues were going to be part of your campaign. I covered your launch, your breakfast launch. Thank you for the invite.
Sure.
And you talked about it at length. And I will just say for the record, my dad died of alcoholism. I've written about it publicly. I pray to God he would have had the moment that you had to hit rock bottom and to come up and to be doing something productive with his life. So I think there's a lot of people out there who've experienced that in their families and who commend you for where you've come. But we're not talking about ancient history here. We're talking about 5 years ago when you really hit that rock bottom moment. And in 2014, the DUI and the crash, you had a lot to lose. Yet you still relapsed in 2017. So even though you sit here, I'm assuming sober man, congratulations. I think it's fair for people to wonder, well, will he fall off again?
Yeah.
And what do you say to that, the people who might be concerned about that?
Right. So 5 years is a very long time. According to the CDC, someone with 5 years of sobriety has less than a 15% chance of ever drinking again. And so when it comes to things like recovery, alcoholism is a nasty disease. Did you know that 92% of people who go to inpatient treatment will relapse? The average number of relapses is 5 on average, before somebody achieves a permanent sobriety. So I'm running as somebody in recovery. I'm running to focus and be the leading Republican in Congress helping people suffer from substance use disorder. It's not something I'm running away from. It's something I'm running into, and I have a whole long platform of things that I want to do, including get community colleges training people who can be substance use counselors, because we don't have nearly enough of them. And so, I'm running into it. I haven't led a perfect life. You want to vote for somebody who's led a perfect life? There are plenty of other candidates who claim to have led a perfect life. I'm going to talk about my shortcomings, and I made some big mistakes in the past, but you know what? Failure doesn't come from falling down. Failure comes from not getting back up and fighting on and trying to help first my own life and my family, and then later the people around me. So I have my annual conference on substance use disorders, and I focus heavily on new legislation. Washington State's the first state in the country that creates a legal privilege between sponsors and sponsees in the recovery community. But if that's where Jesse wants to go, that's fine. I think we need to focus on things like reducing prices, reducing gas prices, helping to solve crime and secure our borders, and that's where I'm going to stay. But also I will be pivoting from time to time to that issue, because I think it shows a softer edge. And if Republicans want to win in the 8th Congressional District, you have to be able to talk plainly about the social safety net issues as well. And certainly substance use disorders, behavioral health challenges are an important part of that safety net.
Well, King County is getting ready to declare fentanyl a state of emergency. How does your personal sort of experience with addiction lead you when it comes to votes like that, policy? Yeah,
and quitting drinking was the hardest thing I've ever done. it's really hard when you're addicted to a substance, whatever it is. Your brain chemistry changes. It becomes something that's an obsession. And so you have to work very hard to get out from underneath it. What we're seeing with fentanyl, obviously, is a nearly 500% increase in overdoses related to fentanyl over the last 4 years. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death for men between 18 and 45 in the United States. It's even higher here. And if you look at the dashboard, it's just exponentially increasing. 4 or 5 people every day are dying from fentanyl overdose. So, the King County Council is focused on a lot of issues. They have not been focusing as seriously as they can on fentanyl. I brought this up. I did get it passed unanimously through committee. I think it'll pass today very effectively, and I'm proud of that. And then in addition to the public health aspects involving fentanyl, we have to do an enforcement initiative to really hold drug dealers and distributors accountable, particularly the cartels that are moving fentanyl across the southern border principally.
To put a button on the issue of your past challenges with addiction, I have heard from some Republicans, they're concerned about optics if you make it to the general election. That you've got Kim Schroer, pediatrician, a woman who deals with kids, nice suburban lady, and that you're going to be painted as this repeat drunk, issues of divorce and all of this, and that the optics are going to be awful.
Yeah, I just don't think that's true. I've been through many, many campaigns. Last year, I ran against 3 very well-funded Democrats. And the reason why the Democrats don't attack on the issue of substance use disorder, because it's a really important part of their own political base. Okay, you don't attack people if you're.
Define. What do you mean by that?
It would be like me attacking a gun store owner for selling weapons of mass destruction.
But you think like Democratic voters are abusers of substances?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm so confused by that. Go ahead.
Within their party, they are the ones that are championing causes to help folks recover from substance.
Okay, I'm glad I asked for the clarification. I've got you.
So look,
Okay.
I would not be the first member of Congress on the 8th Congressional District who is in recovery. There is a well-worn path for people running for office who are in recovery, who are in Congress. There is something called the Recovery Caucus. Several dozen members of Congress who are in recovery. People understand that you go through challenges in life and that you recover from alcohol or other substance abuse. There's a lot of addicts who are in recovery who are in Congress, and they meet and they talk about ways to help solve this problem. So you know what? I've got judges who've ruled in my favor on all the issues that Jesse Jensen's campaign are claiming somehow I'm culpable for. I have a long record of proven sobriety. And by the way, I go get a lock of haircut every 3 months to prove back to 2017. So there's no, unlike most people in recovery, I can prove it because I knew somebody would try and attack me on it someday. So I have proof that I've been sober for 5 years, and I'm proud of that. But yeah, that's not the issues I think folks are going to focus on. And they do it at their peril. You attack, as a Democrat, somebody in recovery, and it has a very strong likelihood of backfiring.
Let's talk about Kim Schroer. Did you see the ad she ran that she is taking on the Biden administration?
Well, yeah, it's disingenuous. It's disingenuous. What I'm seeing from Kim is just following in lockstep what her party leadership, Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden, are doing. There isn't real independence there. The independence she's trying to create is an optical illusion, and people should think hard about that. $10 trillion in new debt added in 3.5 years that Kim Schroer has supported. American Rescue Plan, obviously Build Back Better, it did become law, but that's $10 trillion. That's a 50% increase in our national debt over 3.5 years. Not deficit, the entire debt. When you print money out of thin air to pay for every program under the sun, that is why you get these massive increases in inflation. You can't do it. There are real world consequences to that level of spending. And she's on the hook and she'll have to answer for that, and that will be a major theme of this campaign, because I have the most conservative voting record of the King County Council. I'm going to show this to you.
You brought me a chart?
I brought you a chart. Here are Tax votes, opposed votes. The higher the bar is, the more tax votes you've opposed in King County. Well, that's me. There's the other Republicans, and these are the Democrats. Okay, I have a record of fiscal restraint and fiscal discipline that I'm proud of. I don't believe that we should have government solve all of our problems. Some of that should be handled by the faith community, the nonprofit community, by individual taxpayers, not always by the federal government in Washington, D.C.
The reason I asked about the Schroer ad, it's become very clear, that President Biden is going to his performance and his low approval ratings is going to be a challenge for Democrats who are trying to keep their seats. But also, Jensen ran an ad where he didn't mention Kim Schroer once, didn't show a picture of Kim Schroer. It was all about taking on President Joe Biden. So if you make it through to the general election, do you think that you're running more so against Kim Schroer or more so against Joe Biden?
Well, you're really running against both, especially when you have a 100% voting record as Kim Schroer does with Joe Biden. I'm just stunned that her staff at least hasn't gotten her to take some kind of opposing position in terms of a voting record. So here's a little campaign science for you. The incumbent president is about 3 times more powerful in terms of his gravitational pull than the local member of Congress. So when you see Jesse attack Biden, he's really basically attacking Kim. I think it's important to hold the entire leadership right now responsible. And look at it, I live in King County, Washington. King County's government is totally and utterly controlled and has been for decades by the Democratic Party. Washington State has been controlled for many years by the Democratic Party, almost 40 in the governor's office. The U.S. Senate, the U.S. House, and the president controlled by Democrats. And look at approval ratings right now. Look at cost of living. Look at gas prices, 40-year high in inflation. At some point, the Democratic Party and the policies they're pushing, Kim Schroer, Joe Biden, 100% voting record there, are failing policies. And at the end of the day, if you really want to know what voters are going to focus on, not a 10-year-old divorce, they're going to focus on the issues that affect their daily lives. And that is what the campaign will be about.
I like to believe, and you can disagree, that especially in the 8th, the race is fought and won in the middle. I think there's a lot of people who are moderate or who consider themselves independent, who are going to decide, I think, the fate of the race at the end of the day. And I might be biased, but I think this is the show you need to come on to reach the middle. So a couple rapid fire questions for you, because you cannot avoid them.
No.
Would you like President Trump to run again in 2024?
I will support the party's nominee.
Even if it's Donald Trump?
Yeah. And what I'm saying, well, first of all, nobody's announced at this point in time. And what I'm seeing are a whole lot of very exciting candidates that are starting to jump into the race and move forward. And so I think you're going to see, I think there's a good chance that neither Biden or Trump are actually on the final general election ballot. But we'll see. We'll see. I'll support him if he ends up being the nominee. But we got a long ways to go between now and then. And that's going to be an interesting part of the dynamic. Less so important in this race in 2022, of course.
Is there someone you'd prefer?
No, I'm not there yet. But I like to see a robust primary. I like to see people come out of the woodwork. I know a lot of good candidates that are out there, and President Trump will have to prove why he needs to be the party nominee again. And so we'll watch that very, very carefully. And of course, the same on the Democratic side, whether Joe Biden's getting a lot of pressure not to run again, see if he ends up being the nominee.
We know the former president's a bit of a showman. He did an interview recently where he said he's already made his 2024 decision. The only thing he needs to decide is whether he announces before or after the midterms. In a state like Washington, in a district like the 8th, do you think it would be advantageous or would it hurt Republican candidates if Donald Trump were to announce before the midterms?
I would prefer if all presidential candidates would wait till after November. You're distracting away from the issues that we need to focus on in Washington State right now when you do that, because presidential races take up, they just hog the media time. And we need to we need to focus on these congressional races and how we're going to represent these various components, these big components in Washington State. The congressional district, the 8th, is 6 counties and near 800,000 people. There's a lot of people there. We need the time and the opportunity to focus on the race. So I'd prefer everybody wait till after November.
Did Joe Biden win the presidency in 2020, fair and square?
Yeah, I think he won the presidency. And I think Mike Pence did the right thing by certifying the election. Doesn't mean elections are perfect, right? I was around in 2004 with the Dino Rossi election, and I have concerns about what happened there. And so I did a number of things, including I ran an initiative to the people countywide to create an independently elected nonpartisan director of elections. Julie Wise currently holds that seat. That was my initiative that I ran, raised money for, campaigned for, because we need independent people watching it. So there's always room for improvement. There's always areas of reform, including the voter rolls. There's over 700 people that register their voting address at the King County Courthouse, for example. Like, we've got a lot of work to do, but I do believe Washington State's elections are cleaner than most, in part because we've been doing all-mail voting for a decade now, and we've figured out how the kinks needed to be improved.
Would you have voted to impeach the former president if you were in Congress over January 6th?
No, I wouldn't.
Why?
The election had just happened. I think the best finality for anything is an election of the people. Election had just happened. The president had a couple weeks left in office, and I believe that the tribalism and political infighting in Washington, D.C. is tearing the country apart. And yet another impeachment hearing and vote is unnecessary given that the election had already happened.
I hear some unfortunate things about, stop the steal and all of this. I hear from Republicans on my Facebook when I go encourage them to vote is like, well, is my vote going to count this time? Which I think is incredibly counterproductive for Republicans trying to get every vote that they can. What would your message be to the Republican base about the security of our elections and about the importance of them turning their ballots in?
The process isn't perfect, but in Washington State and in King County, it's pretty good. I've served on the canvassing board repeatedly. I've walked through the cages. I know the system. And so Republicans need to vote. Your vote matters. And vote early. Very least, you won't get a bunch of phone calls chasing down your ballot by a bunch of people. Vote early. It's not like they take those and put them in a room and pull them apart and re-vote for you. It doesn't work that way. And so while the election process is not perfect, we're pretty good. Vote early and have confidence that there's enough supervision put in place by Citizen Election Oversight Committee, by other pieces of legislation I passed in King County that make it, pretty darn secure, pretty darn good. And everyone should vote, and every vote matters, especially this year.
Before we put a bow on it and send you off on your busy campaign day, this is Undivided, so I have to ask you, if you're the newest congressman for Washington State, what's an issue you believe you can work with the rest of the delegation on a bipartisan basis?
Well, look, you want to be in Congress in Washington State, you have to work across the aisle. That is critical on issues important to us, whether it's protecting our environment, open spaces and natural parks, or making sure that we take care of some of our local companies like Boeing, Microsoft, make sure our orchardists and farmers have what they need to be able to compete in a marketplace, doing things like making sure our ports are open and functioning. I have always worked across the aisle at the King County Council. Proven record, there'll be an example of this later today on fentanyl. That's what you have to do. That's what people expect. Now, you can fight and we can battle on issues that are partisan from time to time. Things like police funding, things like funding our men and women in the military. But when it comes to the day-to-day stuff we're doing, most of it is bipartisan, working together. And that's why it's good to have a variety of perspectives in your congressional delegation. And I would make this point. The Puget Sound area has no Republican members of Congress. 0. That's one reason to vote for a Republican in this election, so that at least there's one in the Puget Sound area who is a Republican, because it's very likely Republicans will take over the majority this year.
And if it is not you at the end of the day, will you support whatever Republican moves forward against?
Absolutely, of course. I think we have a lot more in common with one another than we do with the Democrat view of a big, expansive government that defunds our police and doesn't respect the military nearly as well as they should. So yeah, of course I will. I like where we're at right now, and I feel good about driving this thing forward right to the end.
Well, make your final pitch, sir. I mean, gosh, you got a voter sitting right in front of you for the 8th Congressional District. People got ballots in hand. What say you?
Here's the pitch.
Okay.
You know where I stand. I've been there fighting a battle down at the King County Courthouse for years now. I've stood my ground on issues that are important. I have run a major government. I chaired the King County Flood Control District, $60 million annually for many years. I've testified before Congress on issues important to the Pacific Northwest. I've run President Bush's national effort to fight violent crime, a program that made a huge difference across the country. And I believe, more than anything, that an elected official needs to be there as a voice for people who can't speak for themselves, for people who are less fortunate, historically underrepresented. And you've got to be there to have their back because no one else will. So that's why it's a compassionate, conservative point of view that I want to bring to public office. I have a proven track record. The other Republicans, you don't really know where they're going to end up being when it comes to the voting record. You know where I'll be because I've been there.
Up next is someone who you heard referred to a lot in that conversation with Reagan Dunn, and that is Republican Jesse Jensen. Jesse Jensen is an Army veteran, and he actually ran for this exact seat back in 2020, and he came just short of missing it. Of course, it's a much different political environment right now, so he's hoping that the second time is a charm. 2 weeks.
2 weeks, 14 days.
2 weeks, 14 days left? Oh, what am I counting down to? All right, 2 weeks, 14 days. How are you feeling?
No, 14 days left.
2 weeks.
2 weeks, 14 days.
Just start over.
Okay.
2 weeks left.
14 days.
How are you feeling?
We're feeling good. We're feeling like a front runner, but we're running hard through the tape. The whole thing, the whole gestalt of our campaign has been about serving leadership and leaving no one behind. And that's one of the reasons I rescued 2,600 people out of Afghanistan, including 61 American citizens, was because of the Biden's leadership failures in that country. We're seeing that we're leaving folks behind here in Washington State. $460 more a month for grocery bills. Gas prices are a record high, 9.1% inflation. We can't leave folks behind. We need common sense conservatism that's going to go to the other Washington. And we need servant leaders who are going to listen to the people and fight hard for them. And for me, this is a calling. I'm running for my 3 kids, for the vets that I served with. And that's, I think, really resonating with the voters in the 8th Congressional District.
What's different this time around for you? What has been different about campaigning this time around?
Yeah, in our first quarter, we raised over $400,000. I've raised over $1 million. I've raised more money than any other candidate in this race. The people are speaking with their wallets. They're speaking with their support. We have the resources to get our message out this time. And the other thing is that Kim Schroer ran on her rhetoric last time. Now she has to run on her voting record. And that's a voting record that, 538, the independent bipartisan group, has categorized that she has a 100% voting record with Joe Biden. She's walking hand in hand with him in Seward Park. Out of the district, driving to Seattle. We have a great photo of her smiling, walking through the park. And then she runs a campaign ad fighting the administration on a gas tax holiday that was their idea. It's ridiculous. I was quoted in Politico laughing out loud at that ad. It's absurd.
Yeah, we'll get to the Kim Schroer ad in a moment. One thing that's obviously different from 2020 is there are other Republicans, known entities in the race. One of them was just sitting where you're sitting, Reagan Dunn. How has his presence in the race factored into how you're campaigning this time around?
Well, I think that we proved that it was winnable. Last time when I was running in 2020, the only thing I heard is, hey, Jesse, if Dino can't do it, you can't do it. We got 48.2% of the vote, Brandi. We were 7,000 minds away from changing hearts and minds to winning that election on a shoestring budget. We were outraised 5-1, outspent 6-1. And the voters, I think, want somebody that represents conservative values. And, I think it's becoming more and more clear that, Reagan does not represent a lot of the primary voters in this district. But at the end of the day, we're running against Kim Schroer, and we're running against the failed policies of the Biden administration, and it's working.
I was going to say, are you running against Kim Schroer, though? I saw an ad of yours, didn't mention her once. It was about President Joe Biden. Do you feel like if you get past the primary into the general, that you need to run against Kim or that you need to run against Joe Biden?
Well, look, in midterm elections, it's always a referendum on the president, and that's been historically true. But there is a lot of cannon fodder against Congresswoman Kim Schroer. She went to D.C., she became an insider, and she became an insider trader. She violated the Stock Act, failed to disclose information in a trade of up to $1 million. And her answer was, I didn't know that the money left my bank account. I don't know about you, Brandi, but I know if $1 million leaves my bank account, and that's who is representing the voters of the 8th Congressional District, where the median income is around $68,000. In my 5 brothers-in-law, all of them in one form of labor union or in the trades, are really struggling when they have to pay $300 plus to fill their diesel rig to drive from Pierce County up to Seattle. Voters are getting left behind, and we can't have that.
So I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on 2020, but did you happen to see the interview I did at the National Republican Party about you? I'm assuming you watch everything I do. No. Okay.
100%, Brandi.
A spokesperson for the National Republican Party, we had an interview about the midterms, and I asked them if they felt any sort of remorse or guilt for completely just staying out of the race in 2020, for looking at a seat that had only been blue for 2 years and just writing it off. And they said no. They said, if anything, it was a proving ground. Like you had to prove yourself in 2020 to run in 2022. Are you letting bygones be bygones with the National Republicans over that?
I will say that they had a different tone and tenor with me privately when we had that conversation. I was very frank with them there.
And they were apologetic, or?
Well, let's just say it was a private conversation, and I shared my opinion with them very frankly, as a military man is oft to do. And we, left on the best possible terms. And, the Congressional Leadership Fund has $3.9 million allocated to this race after August 2nd primary. The cavalry's coming. The NRCC sees this as a key pickup opportunity. It's one of 5 most competitive races in the country, the most competitive race west of the Rockies. So we are going to take this seat back. When the Seattle Times is writing opinion cartoons of the Republicans pushing the swing district tree swing over, that that the tailwinds are behind us this time, and they're going to be behind whoever wins the primary.
So let's talk about the primary, because we'll get into Kim Schroer and President Biden, but you got to get through Reagan Dunn. I mean, who knows? Matt Larkin might be a sleeper. You and Reagan might split the vote, and he just emerges victorious. Who knows? Are there any fundamental ideological differences that you see, or policy preference differences that you see between you and Reagan? Yeah,
I mean, Reagan is a left of center moderate. He was endorsed by the Tacoma News Tribune, that has a long track record of endorsing.
A left of center moderate. Okay, I will entertain this for a minute.
If you look at some of his positions on social issues, he's raised taxes over 6 times. He's cut millions of dollars from the sheriff's department in King County. Most recently voted for the restorative community pathways that rerouted over $3 million away from law enforcement into a group that was founded by abolitionists that was such an uproar that 4 Democratic mayors stood up and demanded answers from the King County Council, and something that Reagan voted for. So, Reagan has a voting record that the voters of the 8th Congressional District can see very clearly.
Now, quickly on that, as I said, I just got done speaking with Reagan. He said that the ad that you ran accusing him of cutting money from the sheriff's department budget is a complete fallacy. It's not factual at all, and that there's some sort of legal action to get you guys to pull that ad.
I think he's referencing an outside expenditure that we have no communication with.
But you just repeated what the gist of the ad in question is. So you're saying you didn't do that ad, but where is this information coming from that he cut $100 million from the sheriff's office?
Yeah, so we have all of our information cited in our mailers. It was a vote that he took on the King County Council budget.
Okay, I'm going to get that from you, because I don't have the actual facts on that in front of me to call you on it. But he says it's not true. You say it is true, and that you have the data to back it up.
We do.
So I'll get that information from you, and then on the back end, we'll sort that one out. The other place where you guys might differ is the issue of abortion, which is a very heated topic right now. What is your stance on abortion?
Well, I'm pro-life. I'm the son of a pastor and grew up in that faith tradition. But I'm also a constitutional conservative. And what the Dobbs decision did was took that out of the realm of national policymakers and put it into the court of state legislatures. And now it is a state issue, and it just further underscores the importance of state elections. And here in Washington State, that is settled law.
If there were ever to be a vote in Congress, let's say Republicans take over the House and Senate, that would put some national restrictions on abortion, would you vote in favor of it?
So again, the Dobbs decision pushed this to the state legislatures, and that's where the conversation is now. I don't want to get too far into hypotheticals, because I don't know what the language of the bill that I would be voting on is. But again, I'm personally pro-life, but this is now an issue for the state legislatures to decide on.
But is that where you want it? Do you want it in the state legislatures, or would you be amenable to there being some national legislation on it?
I think that the legislation that exists now, the protections around interstate commerce, if people need to move across borders, that is settled law. People can absolutely do that. The states have the rights in the federalist system that we have here in the United States to make their own decisions. Just like you go to a school board to voice your opinion on what your kids are being educated at the school or municipal level, you now can go to your state legislators and say, hey, this is a personal decision that I want to make, and this is where I stand on the issue, and it's now up to the states.
I can do this all day. Would you support any sort of national law at this point restricting or granting abortion rights?
The Dobbs decision has made it very clear that this is now a state's issue.
But where do you want it, Jesse? What do you want?
The Dobbs decision has been very clear.
Don't make me do this all day.
This is now a state's issue.
People, this is, and I know why you're ignoring the question, because it's a heated conversation. Abortion is going to be really critical in suburban areas where the 8th is. But people want to know where you're at on this issue. They want to know if a bill comes before Congress for a vote, a Republican control, if there's a bill to restrict abortion rights in any way nationally, whether you would entertain it.
Listen, you gotta listen to the voters in your district. You know what I mean? And this, I think, is a pretty clear one for the voters of the 8th Congressional District, and it's ultimately up to the state legislators. I have, my mom, and I don't want to go too far into this, but she had to make some very difficult decisions when she was younger. And, I respect that this is a difficult personal issue for women. I've never had to make that decision. Never will. But the Dobbs decision has made it clear now that this is now in the realm of state legislatures. And I think that, ultimately, the only way that you can settle this nationally is through a constitutional amendment, because the Supreme Court, it seems clear, has ignored stare decisis, or has decided that the original ruling was incorrect. And this Supreme Court has changed the interpretation of that law. Maybe in 10 years, there's a Democratic majority on the Supreme Court, or a majority of judges appointed by Democrats. I'll be precise in my language, and that could change. So I think that that's not a question for one body of the U.S. House or Senate to decide. That is up to we the people. And that is something that I think is probably the only way to settle this issue. Until then, Dobbs has made it clear that this is a states' rights issue.
We thought Roe v. Wade was clear for 50 years, and so you can say Dobbs is clear, but Dobbs at the end of the day could have another challenge, like you said. You just said it, 10 years down the road. I'm going to try one more time on this issue, because we just saw that WA poll come out that said 30% of suburban voters, not that I always believe polls, 30% of suburban voters say abortion is the #1 issue. Inflation came in second to that. You can believe it or not believe it, and we can talk about that in a moment. But if there were to be, whether it's Democrats or Republicans pushing it. Democrats want to codify protections for abortion by pushing a law of their own. Some Republicans have talked about it. Mitch McConnell has said it's a possibility. Where do you believe the decision-making should rest on abortion? With the federal government or with the states?
Well, the federal society, the federalism that underpins our Constitution states that we should push as much power to the states as possible.
So you believe it belongs with the
I'm a
states?
conservative. I think that this decision belongs with the states if that's what the Supreme Court just ruled. That is the law of the land. You wouldn't question me on something that the Supreme Court said for gay marriage, Brandi. You would assume that that was that's the law of the land, and we would move on.
Well, Roe v.
Dobbs
Wade was the law of the land.
Well, hey, that was 6 months ago. This is today. The court has ruled on it, and I take serious issue with that poll. First off, our polling shows that abortion in the 8th Congressional District is 5th or 6th most important issue. People are hurting right now. People are concerned about getting their kids safely to school. They're concerned about crime. And we had 3 armed robberies in 72 hours. The inflation is at 9.1%. We have ground war in Europe for the first time since World War II. There is a lot of things falling apart at the helm of President Biden. The baby formula shortage. Mothers cannot feed their kids. I mean, this is critical stuff. These are what people that I'm talking to at the doors, that I'm having conversations with on the ground, that are ultimately the most concerned with. Again, this is settled law. in Washington state.
And yeah, I don't disagree with you that I kind of think that poll is a little bit of bullshit. And at least the people who you're vying for their votes for in the primary, the majority of Republicans, that wasn't the predominant issue for Republicans, which matters in the primary. That's inflation. We could talk about that. And that's why I don't want to keep dwelling on abortion. But we can put a bow on that. I just want to note that I don't feel like you gave me an answer. And I asked like 6 times. So is there a reason why you're tap dancing around that?
I'm not tap dancing around it, Brandi.
Okay,
I'm
that's
personally
my
pro-life.
characterization.
I'm the son of a pastor and personally pro-life. The Supreme Court has made it clear the Dobbs decision has put this into the realm of the state legislatures, and in Washington state, that is settled law.
Let's talk about crime.
Yeah.
Sound good? Kim Schroer, have you seen her ad where she's talking about dealing with crime and taking on the Biden administration? I'm assuming you got some thoughts on that.
Well, again, Politico quoted me as laughing out loud on that issue. She has refused to condemn the defund the police movement. She cut $22 million from Bryan criminal justice assistance grants. And that is particularly noxious, in my opinion, because the Bryan criminal justice assistance grants provide the tools that law enforcement need to be safe. Body armor, body cameras, etc. And she's cutting those funds. She's yet to answer why she did that. She's claiming that she's taking on the Biden administration for pushing one of their ideas. Their idea was this gas tax holiday, which is a terrible idea, by the way. It does nothing to bring down gas prices in a material way. It's like 18 cents at the pump. It's risen over $1.50 plus since Biden took office. And oh, by the way, it leaves a giant hole in our infrastructure budget. Democrats were literally just talking about how we need more infrastructure, and we passed a bipartisan bill out of the Senate to fix some of that infrastructure. But Kim Schroer is in no way, shape, or form taking on the Biden administration. I said it earlier, she has a 100% voting record with them.
Yeah, you can't get a better gift for your campaign than an actual picture of her holding hands with the president right now. That's about as good of a gift as you can get.
It says it all, right? Like, we're going to have, 7, 8, 9, 10 commercials with her walking hand in hand. She drove outside of the district to walk with him in the park in Seattle and grabbed his hand and is all smiles. I have said this from day one. Kim Schroer is a true believer. She votes like a far left liberal. She has a 95% voting record with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, 100% with Nancy Pelosi, 100% with Joe Biden. She has literally stood up to the Biden administration 0 times.
I've said this before. This is certainly an opportunity in 2022 for Republicans. I mean, the president's not doing well. His approval ratings are in the gutter. But it comes at a really difficult time, as you pointed out, for Americans. So it's this great opportunity, but it comes with a ton of responsibility. If you were to be the next congressman in Washington and there's a Republican majority, what would you guys be doing to deal with the issue of inflation and gas prices? Because it's a really great campaign issue to complain about and say, see, look how bad things are. It's another thing entirely to get there and to do the work.
Yeah. Well, first, the reason that we have a 9.1% inflation rate right now is because, Congresswoman Kim Schroer voted for the American Recovery Plan, ARP. That rose the Chicago Fed, the San Francisco Fed, all of the experts said this will increase inflation. And the U.S. House, Nancy Pelosi, Kim Schroer, Joe Biden ignored that and continued to pour trillions of dollars into the economy. There's, the Republicans have identified over $54 billion of wasteful spending that can be cut. We're going to make sure that we're ensuring that supply chain issues are rectified. You do that by removing red tape. You make sure that there's a supply and demand balance when it comes to gasoline, and you don't continually change the regulatory environment, making it impossible for private companies to invest long term. The reason that there isn't oil refinery capacity is because you're moving the target all the time. And if you're an oil exec, you're not going to be able to get your board to approve something because they have a fiduciary responsibility not to the American people, but to their shareholders. And you're not going to be able to convince that board to do something if you don't have regulatory stability. So that's what the Republicans are going to do. It's very simple. Cut taxes, reduce the red tape, and make sure that their supply chains are rectified by clawing some of that stuff back from China and overseas to right here at home, made in America.
So let's talk a little bit more about Reagan and you and sort of the differences for folks. You've got a voter right in front of you, an 8th Congressional District voter. I will say, a little awkward, but I've already voted. If you're a brave man, you can reach my ballot out of my purse. How brave are you feeling today?
No. I never touch a woman's purse or a woman's ballot.
That's yes, both of those things are good. There was a mailer that came out, and as an 8th District voter, I have seen it. It came from a PAC that supports you exclusively. Do you know the one I'm talking about? Do you feel like that mailer was appropriate?
It was very personal in its nature, and I am legally and ethically barred from knowing what they were doing, and I would not have approved that ad had it, been run by me, which again, it cannot be per, FEC rules for outside expenditure. That said, I think that if we believe that the Democrats in August, September, and November wouldn't run something very similar on broadcast TV with a $5 million ad buy, we're kidding ourselves. But at the end of the day, I want to focus more on the issues and the differences between Reagan and I on policy issues and not about his past.
So you had no knowledge that mailer or any substance of it before it hit mailboxes?
None.
Do you think, though, that, and we had a little come to Jesus conversation, Reagan and I, because we're not talking about ancient history here. It's 5 years ago. And he knows very well that past was going to be brought up. He talked about it the day he launched his campaign, and he's tried to get out in front of it. Do you have any reservations about him as a congressman with his history of substance abuse?
Substance abuse, no. And my grandfather was an alcoholic. One of my earliest memories of him, unfortunately, was having scotch spit in my face. And my feelings aside about substance abuse, the thing that I took the most issue with is some of the domestic abuse allegations. I defended people overseas in uniform, and there's a fit and fitness question there that I think the voters need to understand and they need to be cognizant of. But again, none of us are perfect. I take Reagan at his word that is behind him. However, as you said, this is not ancient history. This is just a few years ago. This was not the indiscretions of a young man. However, again, I think what's more important to voters is to realize that Reagan has raised taxes numerous times. He has defunded the police in the tune of millions of dollars, most recently in that vote that I referenced earlier for the Restorative Community Pathways, or RCP. And I don't really know where Reagan stands on abortion. He's flip-flopped numerous times on that issue as well, and I think it's very difficult for the voters of the 8th Congressional District to have any certainty as to what they're getting if they were to vote for Reagan Dunn.
I will tell you, he gave me a more direct answer on abortion than you did today.
Okay.
He says that he is libertarian on the issue and he doesn't believe that the government should have control over it.
Well, that's the fifth answer I've heard from him.
What other answers have you heard from him?
That he is pro-choice, that he voted against the bill, that he's in fact pro-life, and he references his mother's opinion on it. I've heard numerous different permutations of Reagan Dunn on abortion on the campaign trail.
Okay, he gave us a straight answer today, so I know at least today how he feels about abortion. When it comes to Reagan and some of the past indiscretions and issues that he has had, if you don't make it out of the primary, I know you're believing that you will, would you have any hesitation in supporting him as a candidate against Kim Schroer?
I have signed a pledge that I'll support whoever the Republican nominee is coming out of this election. I will say that there are others that have serious concerns if Reagan's the nominee. There was an article referencing, I think, the Republicans' concerned about sleepwalking into defeat is the way that was entitled. And, I'm a data guy. I work in the tech industry. And there's some polling by a guy named Glenn Bolger, who actually did polling for the previous Republican member in this district for 7 terms. And he states that if Reagan's the nominee, he loses by 11 percentage points to Congresswoman Kim Schroer. So, that would be the worst performance in 8th Congressional Republican history if Reagan Dunn was the nominee. And I think that this is such a critical seat, Brandi. It's one of 5 that we need to take back control of the U.S. House. And we can't afford to send a candidate that can't win on into November. And I am, again, a 4-tour U.S. Army Special Operations combat vet, have my MBA from Columbia. I rescued 2,600 people out of Afghanistan. I can get stuff accomplished. I don't want to go to D.C. every single week for the next several years. I have signed a term limit pledge. I have 3 young kids, 6, 4, and 2-year-old. I'm doing that for them. And we shared this with you last time in 2020. The reason I decided to run was a good friend of mine committed suicide, and I felt that we were leaving folks behind. I have close family members that are waiting for over 22 months for rulings from the Department of VA to get their healthcare issues resolved. We're talking to voters who are waiting 5 months to get a biopsy back from the VA to see if they have cancer. These are people that are being left behind. I talk, again, to the union workers in the 8th Congressional District that are having their collective bargaining completely undercut by 9% inflation. We are being left behind. People are hurting. People are getting robbed. Again, 3 armed robberies in Bonnie Lake, Washington, 20,000 people. I went to the Chaz and the Chop last election cycle with Chris Daniels, you may recall that interview, and I said, look, it's not rocket science. This stuff is going to spread into the suburbs. It's going to go to the rest of the 8th Congressional District, and that's where we are. In Marysville, I was talking to the mayor of that city. They've had 7 police ramming incidents where criminals have rammed police cars and then driven off because we are the only state in the union that has probable cause pursuit laws. That is incredibly dumb, and we are paying the price for it here in the 8th Congressional District for safety, and we're paying the price for Kim Schroer cutting $22 million from the Bryan Criminal Justice Assistance grants. People are being left behind in the 8th Congressional District, and we need someone that can win in November.
What do you think you could do at the congressional level with the crime issue? Like you mentioned, I agree. I don't think anybody who watches my show would disagree the idiotic law in Olympia in regards to police pursuits. I mean, what can you do about some of that stuff, though? Because I think Congress feels so disconnected from the public safety issues in a city like Seattle or down in Olympia.
Well, first thing you can do is you can condemn the defund the police movement, something that Congresswoman Kim Schroer still refuses to do. Secondly, I was able to take my body armor off after 7 years in the uniform. I talked to cops in the 8th Congressional District, and they say, hey, Jesse, it's really hard for me to do my job when I know the people that I'm helping would cheer at my funeral. That's a direct quote. It's really hard to do my job when I see terrible things every single day, and I come home to my family and I have to hug my kids, and I'm still reeking of the streets. We need to have federal funding to make sure that our police have mental health care. I was talking to the chief of police in Issaquah, and out of his own salary, he pays to make sure that his men in uniform have a mental health app on their phone. Wow. That's why. That's like teachers having bake sales to make sure that their kids have school supplies. That's crazy. We need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to support our men and women in law enforcement, in first responders, to make sure that they have the equipment and the training. Look at Uvalde. Look at the things that are coming out of that school shooting. For an hour, there was a mother who jumped over a fence, got out of handcuffs, rescued her kid, came back while the police were still standing there. I have been in situations where I am shot at and you run towards the sound of gunfire. You don't run away from it. So we need to make sure that we have good training, that we have the best and the brightest in law enforcement. And look at Seattle. Look at Carmen Best. She quit because of stupid decisions that were being made, but that politicians were saying. Words have impact. Leaders cast a shadow. And we need a Republican in King County at the national level on the West Coast who is able to stand up to the mob on the left, like I have seen you do in reactions to the Seattle craziness, Brandi, and say, this is dumb. This is hurting people. This is hurting victims. This is hurting victims.
And I'm glad to hear you talk about the veterans issues. And Tiffany Smiley, of course, the Senate candidate who, I mean, we assume she would go forward to the general election. I feel like there's just this whole world, it seems like, between now and all the issues of today and the withdrawal from Afghanistan. But people don't know, you were texting me like every day about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Hey, we're doing this, we're trying to get, interpreters out and trying to get people out. And it was like, it almost felt like it was like your full-time job for a little bit there. What are some things as a veteran that you think you would like to get a start on if you're elected? Well,
one of the first things I was talking to Ryan Zinke, one of my endorsers, that the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to hold folks accountable. In the Army, you have an after-action review called a hot wash. I want to understand why President Biden told General Milley that no, you can't have the 2,500 people that you say you require to have a safe exfil. You have 500. And General Milley responds to President Biden, says, okay, sir, we're shutting down Bagram Airfield. Bagram has miles of standoff. You see the bad guys coming from a mile away. Instead, we went to Hamid Karzai International Airport that has a standoff from about me to where the camera is, about 10 feet. And as a result of that, an ISIS terrorist set off a suicide vest and 13 Marines are dead because of that. And Joe Biden checked his watch when those folks came home under a flag at Dover. So accountability. We need to hold folks accountable for that. I should have never had to rescue 2,600 people out of Afghanistan. Are you kidding? 61 American citizens. I rescued an 81-year-old grandmother with a blue passport. I rescued a daughter who was 2 weeks old who was born on 9/11. That is not America. We don't do that. We don't do that. So you need to hold folks accountable. And, mental health care for our veterans is so critical. This is just another example of putting more burden on vets who have done the most. The leader of Task Force Pineapple talked about this, wrote an editorial. He described it as being a 9/11 dispatcher who knows that support is not coming. I still get messages from folks who are being tortured in Afghanistan, trying to escape that country because of decisions that we made that were politically driven. But stepping away from the Afghanistan withdrawal, weak leadership has consequences. Look at Ronald Reagan. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Look at President Biden. A minor incursion into Ukraine will be met with a more measured response. Is that the vernacular of a world leader? Why do you think President Putin invaded Ukraine? Because he thought he got an invitation from the Biden administration. We were promised this foreign policy expert, Brandi. Instead, we get land war in Europe for the first time since 1945. Why has there been no one fired for the baby formula shortage? No one held accountable. We have a confluence in this country of bad ideas and worse leadership, and it's time for change. That said, I think that there is, a lot more utility in looking at the headlights rather than the taillights. And I think that, we need to bring people together. One of the first bills that I'll pass if elected to Congress is a community service or community involvement bill where, I think that we don't have shared facts. The name of this podcast is Undivided, right? On the right, you have one set of facts, and on the left, you have a different set of opinions. I'll tell you, you don't have different opinions if you're in a foxhole. You don't care if the person next to you is gay or if they are Protestant or Muslim or Jew. You care that they can shoot straight. And I'll tell you the same thing is true if you are working with them in a Job Corps setting or a Peace Corps setting. So I think that we need more. The Chris Domay guy that I wear a bracelet on died on his 14th combat deployment. Why are we sending the same people over and over and over and over again overseas? It's almost a forgotten group that we just ask these rural kids or folks from underserved communities to go and fight our wars for us. We need to make sure that there's good involvement and that we're making sound decisions, and that's why I think we need more than 17% of the U.S. House of Representatives to have served in uniform. If you're going to vote to send somebody's son or daughter to fight a war in a foreign land, I think you need to know what you're doing.
Tell me more about the community service bill you'd propose. What would it do?
Yeah, so my proposal is to have a year of some sort of federal subsidy for someone to go into a community service role or organization, whether it's a year in the military, a year in the Peace Corps, a year in the Job Corps, or even just helping as a teacher's aide in a community, in your own community for a year between high school and college. To share shared experiences, to have an interaction from a small town in North Dakota, the same person have that interaction with somebody from the Bronx or from Hollywood. You need to have a shared experience in this country. It's something that we've gotten away from here in the last 10 or 20 years. People are on their phones, they're on social media, they can get their own information from their own echo chamber. We need to break down those barriers, and we need to do it better together.
I really like that. I don't know if I've heard that. I mean, it's not quite like Israel, whereas in Israel you have to serve 2 years in the military. I don't know if everybody's cut out for that here. We got a lot of weak kids these days, but you could send them to do some nice.
Exactly.
I like it. I like it a lot. Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of utility in sending Americans overseas to be that shining city on a hill that Reagan talked about.
And learn about how good they have it.
Exactly.
In the United States. A couple rapid fire questions for you, because I promise you it's going to matter to the people who are watching this. Who won the presidency in 2020?
President Biden is the president of the United States, and a lot of folks have regrets.
Did he win fair and square?
He's the president of the United States. I think that he won fair and square, and he's the president of the United States.
Would you have voted to impeach former President Donald Trump over January 6th?
No.
Why?
I think, there's a lot of folks that had very heartfelt opinions. Dan Newhouse was one of them. But I felt that, especially at the time, that there was a rush to judgment. There wasn't enough information there, and I think that there was serious questions as to whether or not it was actually instigated by President Trump, and more information needed to be presented, and there was a rush to judgment, and it seemed politically motivated.
President Trump did an interview, whether it was him just trying to get attention, I'm not sure, but he said he's already made his decision about 2024. The only decision left to make is whether to announce before or after the midterms. Do you think it would be particularly advantageous for you if President Trump were to announce he's going to run again before the midterm election? I'm
running to represent the people of the 8th Congressional District here in 2022. I'm proud to have the endorsement of President Trump's former Director of National Intelligence, Rick Grinnell, his former National Security Advisor, Robert C. O'Brien, his former Secretary of Interior, Ryan Zinke. I'm also proud to have the endorsement of the former Attorney General, Rob McKenna, and the former Governor of Washington State, Dan Evans. I think that exemplifies how I have been able to build an incredibly wide base of support on the Republican Party, talking about servant leadership and how we can't leave folks behind, and we need these core Reagan-esque policies, a lot of which were championed in the previous administration by President Trump in order to prevent leaving folks behind in this country.
So regardless of timing, would you support President Trump if he were the party's nominee?
I'm going to support the Republican nominee. I think that there's a lot of folks, and I think President Trump is still deciding, if or when apparently he's going to jump in, and I look forward to that dissertation, and I will support the Republican nominee in 2024. Well,
as you know, the clock is ticking to the primary. This is a tough district. I mean, no matter how you slice it, it's such a diverse district. You've got a voter sitting in front of you. Make your pitch, your sales pitch.
Yeah, again, you can boil this campaign on my side down to leave no one behind. I think that we need folks that can make informed decisions, that appreciate and understand how supply and demand works. I have my MBA from Columbia. I've worked in the tech sector for 7 years. I'm a director in a technology company. I've served my country in uniform on over 4 combat tours, 2 full calendar years in Afghanistan. As I said, I stepped up and got stuff done. I rescued over 2,600 people from Afghanistan, including 61 American citizens. Servant leadership is critical. We need somebody that's going to respond to voters, that's going to listen to voters, that's going to go out and fight for those same voters. We need a fighter. We need somebody that's going to stand up with an independent streak, free thinking, who's willing to stand up to his own party when they're wrong, who's certainly willing to stand up to the mob on the left and make sure that we're fighting for, again, common sense things like let's fix the economy, let's bring gas prices down, let's secure our border, and let's fight crime. This is an epidemic, and we need to make sure that we're, again, leaving no one behind. And I humbly ask for your support, even though you've already voted, Brandi, and all of your listeners on this Undivided podcast who live in the 8th Congressional District. I humbly ask for their vote.
Now, one thing I want to provide a little additional context on, you heard Jesse Jensen say repeatedly that Reagan Dunn voted to defund law enforcement. I believe that that's misleading. I think there's critical context that's missing, because to me, when I hear that statement, I think that Reagan Dunn wanted to defund the police in 2020 during the uproar, the racial reckoning around policing. That's not the case. And in fact, when I asked the Jensen campaign to provide, the data for where they were getting this, they sent me an article from November of 2008. Of course, there were a lot of local governments who were dealing with severe fallout from the economic situation in 2008. And so that is the context under which a vote was made to cut some funding to the King County Sheriff's Office. It was controversial at the time. I mean, there were certainly concerns about what impact this would have to public safety, but there were county-wide cuts, not just to the Sheriff's Office. County-wide cuts proposed at the time of $93 million, including more than $10 million from the Sheriff's Office. So again, I think it's critical context to understand the claims that Jesse Jensen is making against Reagan Dunn. I don't believe that Reagan Dunn, I don't think it's good faith to say that Reagan Dunn is someone who would support for no reason defunding or cutting law enforcement. I did get a chance as well to speak with the incumbent in this race, Congresswoman Kim Schroer. She's only had the seat for 2 terms. She's still fairly new to Congress. It's a seat she stole from Republicans. She and I are going to sit down for a longer conversation leading up to the general election. She just had about 10 minutes or so to chat with me this week as she was in between votes in the House. Here's our conversation. Down to the wire a little bit. I just sat down with Jesse Jensen and Reagan Dunn Do you have a preferred general election opponent, ma'am?
Oh, they're going to work that out themselves.
No one who you'd rather go up against?
You know, I'm just excited to make the case to the people in the 8th District of what a great job I've done working for them with both parties to get things done and how much I've accomplished. And, it's good. Yeah.
For you, is this time around any different than 2020? Is there anything different about your campaign this election cycle than last?
Brandi, it is so exciting to be back in person with people, to be knocking doors and in meetings and having campaign events. And so there's a lot more energy on the ground, and it feels like a real race.
You know, one thing I think is different in 2020, Democrats were maybe having a better time nationally. 2022 has been a little rough for the current president in terms of his approval ratings. How does that factor in for you?
Well, right now, things are just rough, right? We thought we'd be out of COVID. It's still kind of on us. In addition to that, gas prices are high. There's inflation. Like, people are just hurting right now. That's why I think it's so important for them to know how hard I've been working to make things better, to take on the administration and ask for a holiday from the federal gas tax, to go to bat by cracking down on oil and gas companies who are gouging during a crisis, by working on ocean shipping and our ports to get things moving again, to bring down costs. And so, yeah, things are tough, but what you really want is a member of Congress who's going to bat for you, whether things are good or tough.
You just said a line there, taking on the Biden administration. It was a line you also used in a recent campaign ad. I gotta say, I was like, what is she talking about? First, what are you taking on the Biden administration about? Like, because he supports a gas tax holiday.
Well, he didn't support it when I first introduced that bill. But here's what I would say. I will work with anybody to better life for the people in the 8th District. And sometimes that means working with the administration, and sometimes that means working against the administration. And I think a perfect illustration of that would be a community-based outpatient clinic for our veterans in Wenatchee. They were not serving our veterans right. They were not getting the care they needed. They were being left on hold. And so I went toe-to-toe with the secretary and the undersecretary of the VA, the administration, to get better care for our veterans. And that's what I mean. I will work with or work against in order to get things done for the people in the 8th District.
Well, there's clearly got to be a campaign strategy to a Democratic congresswoman in a swing district in a year where the president doesn't have great support, saying in a campaign ad, I'm taking on the Biden administration. There's strategy there, right?
I want people to know that I will work with again or work against in order to get the best results for the people in this district. And I have a track record of working with both parties. In fact, I've had 14 bills signed into law, and 8 of them were signed by President Trump and 6 of them by President Biden. And you have proof points all along the way that I will work with any president, any member of Congress, if we can move the ball forward.
Abortion has obviously become a major issue for the 2022 midterms. Did you see the WA poll that was out? The Seattle Times, King 5 did a poll. This surprised me, I will say. Their poll found among the people who were surveyed that abortion is the #1 issue for suburban voters and inflation is #2. That surprised me. Does that surprise you based on what you've heard while campaigning?
Look, both issues are really important. People are hurting right now from inflation and gas prices. And they can also at the same time be devastated by what's going on with the Supreme Court and seeing that girls today have fewer rights than their mothers and grandmothers. And having such a fundamental right, and by the way, a right to make a decision about your body, about your future, about if and when to have a child and under what circumstances, that is also an economic factor in people's lives. And I just think that you can be concerned about 2 things at once.
So how does the issue of abortion, given that that is going to be one of the fundamental things that separates you from a Republican candidate, more so Jesse Jensen than Reagan Dunn, but how does that issue play in the general election for you?
I will make sure that the people in the 8th District understand that I am the only candidate in this race who will stand up for a woman's right to make her own reproductive health choices. I am the only one.
And Reagan Dunn, when he sat here, at least across from me today, he says that he believes that that is not a decision the government should make, that he supports certain restrictions on abortion, but based on our conversation, he would fall closer to the pro-choice camp than pro-life.
You may need to probe further. He did vote against Roe on King County Council, and any one of my opponents will be asked to sign on to a national abortion ban. And I think that the people in this district need to consider what that would mean for the state of Washington.
Quickly on the Reagan Dunn vote, there was a vote in the King County Council. It was a little performative, but it was basically the council saying, we disagree with the Supreme Court decision, and sort of making that statement as a council. And Reagan Dunn did vote against it. He's of the belief that your campaign somehow got that up the chain and pushed that vote in the King County Council, so we had to be on the record about it. Any truth to that, Congresswoman?
The vote was whether Roe should be the law of the land in King County. It was affirming that Roe is the standard and the law of the land in King County, and he voted against that.
Did your campaign have anything to do with that vote coming to fruition?
Oh, no.
Okay, that's his accusation. He thinks this was a sneaky campaign ploy where you put it, you got your people to get that in front of the King County Council.
No. Look, I'm a community pediatrician and I'm a member of Congress, and I'm really focused on serving my constituents, and I don't play those kind of games.
Speaking of playing games, when it comes to the general election and sort of how that's going to shape up, one issue that has been brought up is Reagan Dunn's past substance abuse, his issues with alcoholism. It's something he's talked about publicly, relapsing in 2017 and sort of the fallout from that. Is that fair game, do you believe, in the general election if he's the one who goes through? Is that something we will see you attack him on?
Look, I think that the issue of addiction and alcoholism is a personal issue and a personal struggle, and I sympathize with this struggle, and I wish him well.
Is it something that you anticipate your campaign bringing up in the general election?
No.
Congresswoman, I think, so we're a little truncated here, but I think, as you had stated, things are tough right now. There's no way around that. Families are struggling. The current president has a very low approval rating. Even in our state, he's underwater, which is somewhat surprising for Washington. How do you, as a sitting Democratic Congresswoman in a swing district, try to contend with a political environment like this one?
The great thing about being a member of Congress and now having 3.5 years under my belt representing the 8th District is that people in the district know me. I've had almost 100 town halls. I've been to every corner of the district many times. And they know with my track record, they know about the community projects that have happened because of me representing them and because of my office. The constituents, 3,000 of them who we have served, the $19 million we have brought back to the 8th District, the people here know me. And they are voting for me, not for the party or the president. This is an election about who they want to represent them. And I have the credentials and the results to show that I have been an incredibly effective member of Congress for the 8th District.
One of the issues that whatever Republican opponent you have is sure to bring up is the issue with the mishandling of stocks. Do you want to take an opportunity to address that issue?
Sure, I'm happy to. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify. My husband bought stock. He didn't tell me. As soon as he did, we reported it. It was a missed deadline. And, we have taken proactive steps now to put our retirement accounts into a blind trust so that there will this could never happen again. I will never miss a deadline again. And I will not even know which investments we own.
Jesse Jensen's like, well, mishandling aside, we're talking about $500,000, and he's using it to paint you as this like Richie rich doctor who's out of touch with people who are struggling right now. What do you say to that characterization?
I would say that's an unfair characterization, and that I am working every day to make life easier for the people in the 8th district on everything from bringing down premiums to a child tax credit to working to bring down gas prices. I am going to bat for the people in this district.
We'll end with this. The show is called Undivided, after all. If you are given another term in Congress, what is something that you look forward to working with your Republican colleagues on?
You know, one thing I'm looking forward to working on together, in addition to bringing down gas prices and inflation, is that many of us share a common goal in making sure that in our food programs, we address hunger, but we also invest in healthy food. Because if the government is paying for Medicaid and Medicare, upfront investments in healthier foods and directing some of that nutrition would pay off in the long run. I think it's good common sense that Democrats and Republicans can agree on.
All right, Congresswoman, any final words for voters?
I just want the district, the voters in this district, to know how hard I work every day for them, that I listen to their concerns and I take them to Washington, D.C., and that I will continue to deliver for the people in the 8th district, and I would be honored to earn their vote.
You know, this is a race that is really going to be decided by the middle. And I like to think that that's what Undivided is about. It's about people who consider themselves politically homeless, people who often, would describe themselves as moderates. And so certainly if you live in the 8th Congressional District, you have a lot of say here. It's nice, I think, for the middle to sometimes get a huge say in what happens in our country. And again, this is one of only a handful of seats in the country that's really considered a serious swing seat where Republicans have a chance to grab it. I know Republicans are going for a lot more seats. This is by far the most important swing seat on the entire West Coast, and it has national implications. So even if you don't live in the 8th Congressional District in Washington, as I was joking with the guys, I do, and so certainly it's a race that we've voted in as a household. But even if you don't live in the 8th Congressional District, there's so many things in this race that speak to other races happening across the country. President Biden's low approval rating and the challenge that presents to Democratic incumbents who are trying to keep their seats, and also the issue of abortion. I think Republicans would like it to go away before the November election, but this is something that Democrats are going to continue to message around leading up to November, because they believe, particularly in the suburbs, particularly in swing districts, that they are on a side of, they and voters are on the same side of this issue. So we will certainly see. But you saw how challenging of a subject that is for Republicans to talk about just plainly and bluntly, because they understand the implications of it. All right, that's it for this special edition of Undivided. I'm Brandi Kruse. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. I will see all of you on Friday.